It's time to get down with the breakdown. This is Jeff, aka Machamp Bailey, and it's time for the Bragging Rights Breakdown. Welcome back to week 2, everyone. How's your team health looking? I know it's a strange week with several defenses making a dent and plenty of injuries going around this week, limiting a lot of points. Speaking of injuries, per quest, I've added an injury section, so here are this week's notable injuries. I need to take a deep breath before we get started on this because it's a major list as compared to most weeks. Also, keep in mind, I'm going to do my best to keep it only to the new injuries. That being said, let's start at QB. The first few QBs, like Jay Cutler, who's out for 2 to 3 weeks most likely, Josh McCown at least 2 games, and Jimmy Garoppolo at least 1 week, are at the very least, they're not major contributors, and they're not going to be on most people's rosters. But they may affect a few teammate rankings, so pay attention to your wideouts, tight ends, running backs, etc. Speaking of running backs, there's a big week for injuries in running backs with over 7 getting injured. So many getting injured, including Denny Woodhead, who's out for the season with a torn ACL, and Jonathan Stewart out for at least 1 to 2 weeks. And the likes of Arian Foster, Kadeem Carey, it's hard to say, Amir Abdullah, Adrian Peterson, Thomas Rawls, Doug Martin are all uncertain, and not to mention a few others banged up like Rashad Jennings, who may or may not play. It will be a heavy week on the waiver wire just because of a lot of injuries to the running back position. It's going to be really interesting. Wide receiver, a few receivers look to be out, including Dante Moncrief, which you'll hear about later, for 1 week minimum. Brandon Marshall, again, you'll hear about, and Doug Baldwin. J.J. Nelson and Braxton Miller are questionable, leaning towards out, with Julio Jones, Eric Decker, and Sammy Watkins looking banged up, but leaning towards getting a start still. Keep an eye on their status, however, and you may not want to start some people like Sammy Watkins just because even though they are going to start, they're not going to be in best condition. All right. Tight end, Virgil Green's the only notable one. Day-to-day with no other major tight ends taking a seat this week. Now for what's going on around the NFL. The Bills have fired their offensive coordinator in just the second game. Seems very early for this kind of move, but hopefully that means some good news for anybody who's got Bills offense. Dexter McCluster is getting traded to the Chargers, a name that has kind of been on the back seat, but he's looking to take over that passing down back position that the San Diego Chargers are really in desperate need for with Woodhead going down. Kirk Cousins is quickly losing his team support, and they get increasingly frustrated. Just watch him during the games. It's actually getting pretty bad. Don't be surprised if you see a change in this position in the coming weeks. Finally, the Seahawks have been fined $400,000, and they lost their 5th round pick, draft pick as in 2017, as well as being forced to abandon their first week of OTAs or organized team activities due to having contact practices during their OTAs this year. That is banned by the NFL. It was an effort to help prevent injuries, and coincidentally, 2 guys banged their heads together and were out for a week during preseason. Due to this, and Pete Carroll is going to get fined $200,000 himself for letting this happen. Of course, it was probably his idea. On to the weekly awards. Juggernaut, Holder Like a Six-Pack, came in big and took control with 108.4 points. Kingslayer, while there's still technically no Kingslayer, or Kings to be slayed, I should say, I will give it to Connor for overcoming a landslide of predictions against him. Lombardi, even though he lost Baller on a budget, started Cam Newton with 29.8 points in most of the week. Tough luck, Jason for Stupidasso takes this one, losing only to one of only 4 teams he would have lost to. On the opposite end, tough luck, Nate got lucky playing only one of 3 teams he could have beaten out of the 12. Teabag, Holder Like a Six-Pack, beat out Balla on a budget by 23.4 points. Big blowout that no one was expecting. Bonehead, this one is actually mine, even though I had the second most points again this week and I won. I did leave 84.5 points on the bench, mostly Corey Coleman and Matt Ryan. Failed Prophet, Stu Pedasso gets this award for losing despite the projections. Space Cadet, I'm happy to report there still isn't one, although another honorable mention, Luke and his Raiders defense got more negative points this time, -6. Luke, seriously, you need to trade them out. They're not looking what they were supposed to be. Game of the week in a game decided by 7 yards. This always hurts. That's just literally a play away. Stu Pedasso and Balls Deep take it. Stu Pedasso losing by 0.7. All right. Now it's on to the recap. Machamp Bailey versus Project Badass. I can't talk today. I don't know what's going on. I took this one in what looked like an ass-kicking going into Monday night. The Eagles' defense did try to overcome the near 30-point deficit, but as you know, for defense to do, that's very, 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 very difficult. They only got 15, falling short. Despite my constant receiver issues from Keenan Allen, Dante Moncrief, and Brendan Marshall, like I said, you'd hear those names later. My Broncos defense did help cover the difference and help win the game. I called this correct as well as Brian and Chris. Ball on a budget versus Holder like a six-pack. This was a massive upset from the predictions. Connor's team stood tall with the Rivers-Benjamin combo really leading the way. Despite Cam Newton doing Cam Newton things, Brian wasn't able to cover the abysmal performance by over half of the rest of his team. Trailing by 32 points heading into Monday, Alshon Jeffrey just couldn't make that many points up, and no one took Connor, so nice win, man. The Fisters versus a team has no name. Breaking 100 for the second week in a row, the Fisters got an outstanding performance from Matt Forte to steal the win over Chris. While change in 2 of his starts could have won him the game because it was actually somewhat close, Chris's team just didn't do well enough to win. Put another W in the Fisters win column, and Mike, Folks, Brian, and Nate all called this one right. Stu Pedasso versus Balls Deep, a good performance by Jordy Nelson Sunday night, locked in a narrow victory by Balls Deep, and I mean narrow. While Jason had several bench points to give him the win, he couldn't pull it off, started the wrong people. Honestly, I don't blame him for the starts he did put in versus the ones that were on the bench that went off. Jason's Cardinals defense did the most work for him. That's never a great sign, especially if the rest of your team isn't performing. Bad day for his receiving core, gave Chris the W, and Brian the solo predictor to get this one right. Nice win, Chris S. The Cowboys versus Beats by Ray. In what looked like what I would call Luke's worst week ever, Beats by Ray took this win. It was hard to win when your best player only putting up 12.7 points. That's just a really rough week. And your defense working against you at -6. I think it's time to give up on that Raiders D, Luke. I know you actually drafted them thinking that they'd be good, but unfortunately, there's always that disconnect between what might be good, in preseason versus what actually happens, especially with a young team. I wouldn't mind taking them in the next year or two, but as of right now, it's looking really bad for the Raiders. Rob won this one in a big way, and Brian, Chris, and myself called this accurately. Fire-breathing rubber duckies versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Bortles. Another narrow victory in a close game as predicted when plenty of players rounded off this game Sunday night for Nate. Aaron Rodgers, with their run-in touchdown, sealed the game despite a pretty bad performance prior to that. Or aside from that, not prior. Would Rodgers have just made one more touchdown pass to Cobb? However, this game would have ended differently with Mike winning. However, Rodgers didn't look good under the pressure that the Vikings were giving them. I believe I called something like that if you want to go look back at last week's video. But under pressure, he just couldn't do it, and Mike ended up with the second loss of the season, which really actually caught me off guard. Chris and Nate himself are the ones who called this game. So the final tally for the predictions, recap I should say, is Brian won it with 4-2. Chris went 3-3 again. I went 2-4. Nate copied that at 2-4. Mike, folks, 1-5, so just all around bad week for him. And Foley with 0-6. So Foley, you might want to give up on these predictions. That was pretty bad. Now, here are this week's predictions. A Team Has No Name versus Machamp Bailey. Both of us are looking to gain an edge to improve to 2-1. This can be an interesting matchup because I have the predictions. Chris has the comparison. Assuming my receivers actually start, which is going to be rough, I hope I get some information prior to game start Sunday since I'll be out of town. Or might be able to find some replacements, who knows. I have a slight edge to myself, however, only because I've had more consistent production. For that reason, I have to take myself this week. And just as a heads up, I did not get any predictions, so it's only going to be me this week. If you want to text them to me, I'll get them in the recap and let everybody know what you predicted. Project Badass versus Holder Like a Six-Pack. This game prediction is drastically different than if they would have met last week. For starters, Woodhead is out now, so Foley took a shot in his running back position. On top of that, Connor stood tall last week and defeated a landslide predictions against him. Connor currently has some projections and very slight edge in the player comparison, but Foley finds a good switch for Woodhead, then it could really change. However, I actually think I'm going to take Connor in this one, especially to Foley really needing a solid filler, and I don't see anybody on his team really filling that position. Riding high on back-to-back wins, the Fisters are looking to continue their winning streak against the 0-2 Bala on a budget. Player comparison favors the Fisters team, but the projections favor Brian slightly. However, I'm honestly stuck as a toss-up here. I have a hard time seeing Brian fall to 0-3 after finishing second last year. But this is a different team, so you never know. Only because the girls need to fill in for an injured Abdullah. I don't think Landry's going to do that job for them as a flex position. And I'm going to have to pick Brian on this one. Again, I really am leaning towards the Fisters, but I'm going to pick Brian just because I think they're going to have a harder time on the waiver wire this week. Balls Deep versus Beats by Ray. This game is an extremely tight, with the winner getting the chance to improve to a positive record because they're both at 1-1. Projections only slightly favor Balls Deep, but the player comparison favors him heavily. However, Julio Jones is not 100%. I doubt he'll live up to his 15-point projection. That being said, per the fantasy experts, don't send your QB against Denver. If you look at the last two QBs that went against Denver, and again, I'm not saying this as a homer, this is straight from the fantasy analysts. The last two QBs that went into Denver were the top the weeks that they didn't. I know it's only week 2, so it's hard to say something like that. But all the analysts are saying just don't send quarterbacks into Denver. It's a really rough place to win, especially when you got Von Miller and the defense over there. If Rob starts Dalton, it's going to hurt, especially after he led his team last week. If Rob starts Dalton, I got to go with Balls Deep for the win on this one. However, if he gets a solid filler quarterback and doesn't start Dalton, or he just has an outstanding performance against the Broncos, then there is a chance for him to win. Teenage Mutant Ninja Bortles versus Stu Pidasso. Nate is getting some of the highest projections I've ever seen. He's over 100 on the projections, which is very rare. But he's earned them at 2-0. I say earned them kind of weakly because neither one of them was fantastic showings. But he is 2-0, so I understand the projections. Jason is not far behind him, however, and Jason also has the player comparison on his side, especially with Adrian Peterson most likely sitting out a game. I'm going to point out that I doubt D'Angelo Williams will reach his projected 17 points in Philly. And if the Lions get pressure on Rodgers, he's not going to have a good game either. We've seen him kind of struggling under pressure the last, probably I'd say 10 games if you go back to last year. Don't expect him to break 18 this week. Crowell is also getting favorable projections after last week's production. I don't see him getting as high as he's getting projected. So I think the inflated stats are really misleading. And I'm going to have to say that they're a misnomer and that Jason's going to swing back in this one, especially seeing his production in week 1 and how he played his team. Fire-breathing rubber duckies versus the Cowboys after the abysmal performance by Luke's team last week. He's looking to prove week 1 was not a fluke. Mike's team has been underperforming too, however, so that might make this match even. I will make the prediction that one of these two teams will get the Luck Out Award, being that the other person is one of the few people that they could have beaten, seeing as they're both at 0-2. That being said, Luke is 1-1, Mike is 0-2. Mike is getting a great lead in projections by over 15 points. While Luke has a player comparison, the projections, however, are skewed because when I looked at them, Doug Martin was still in for Luke, and he's most likely going to miss at least a week. But both teams are riddled with injuries. Between the two, there are 5 of their starters that need replacement. Honestly, though, some of them could start, especially looking at like people like Decker. He's most likely going to play. Whether he's going to be a great production receiver is going to be another question. Honestly though, I have to stick with Firebird this week. After 2 losses, I don't expect an 0-3 start from Mike. I just don't. And after last week's production from Luke, again, I sincerely doubt he'll have that bad a production again, but I just have to go with Mike on this one. Last but not least, here's another new addition to the breakdown. It's called the trading block, all right? Last week was the first trade of the year, went through with fully giving me Brandon Marshall in exchange for Shady McCoy. A lot of good that did me, seeing as he's probably going to miss a week, which is fantastic. Hopefully I can get to my phone while I'm in Europe. That being said, Foley is still looking to make a deal. He's offered up Odell Beckham for the right running back. So if you really need some good receiver and you've got some running back depth, please talk to Foley. He's also said Roethlisberger might be up for trade, so keep that in mind. Also, I need another receiver, seeing as I can't keep any of them healthy. So if you have a receiver that you're willing to trade off, specifically for a tight end or quarterback in exchange, please go ahead and reach out to me. That wraps up a very long video. Please let me know in the poll over here in the league or in the comments below if you'd like this to be one long video like it is, or if 2 shorter videos makes more sense for you. All right. As a heads up, there will most likely not be a video the next week, and the video for week 4 will come late, probably Thursday or Friday. This is due to the fact that I'm going to be in Europe. If I do, however, find myself bored or with some downtime in the middle of the week while I'm there, I will do a crappy phone video recap. But again, just don't count on that because I am going to be in Europe and I'm probably going to be drunk in a pub somewhere. I will recap both weeks 3 and 4 when I return if I don't get to those videos. Likewise, don't forget that bye weeks start week 4. So if you own Green Bay or Eagles players, pay attention so you don't end up on the Space Cadet Award when I get back. That being said, until next week, patch up those injured players and I'll catch you downfield.